we are gonna make a knife pleat Roman shade right here on our work order with regular lining, inside mount with a valance. And we are also going to interline it with a khaki colored lining instead of just the white lining on the back. So here is our sample. We had to test how the color looks on this fabric with 1 layer of white lining or 2 layers of white lining, or 1 layer of white and 1 layer of khaki, and then this fabric, to see how the colors would show up as a mock test. Because if you just have the 1 layer, pulling up that khaki color, you see how you lose a little bit of the true color, rather than when this khaki lining is inside, the colors stay a lot truer and really pretty. The alternative is to put blackout back here, but then it would be darker in the room. This is still gonna filter some light through it, but it's gonna keep the colors really true when the shade is down, and it'll be really pretty. So this is what we're going with, and it was nice to be able to test it up in the window. And now we can make this shade. So now that we have our decisions made on what kind of lining we're gonna use to line this Roman shade, and then which color we're gonna put on the inside as the interlining, then we can cut all of the fabric and then sew it all together. So the face fabric obviously has a pattern, so we had to sew that matching the pattern, and then serge the edges. And then I like to press the seams to the outside, so the left seam is going to be pressed to the left side and the right seam is going to be pressed to the right side. And then the same thing with the lining. We cut all the lining pieces, and because this shade is wide, it needs 2 pieces of lining, but not 3. 3 would be too many. So when we need 2 pieces of lining, I don't just put the seam in the middle. So I would have to cut one of the 2 pieces of lining in half lengthwise, and then put the whole piece of lining in the middle, and then half on either side. And that's called bagging the fabric. It's just a term I learned in a book a long time ago. And I don't really say that, but if you want to know the official word for putting your whole width of fabric in the middle and then half on either side, that's called bagging, B-A-G-G-I-N-G. And it's, really important to get the seams in the most inconspicuous place. So it seems like it might be maybe extra work because you need 2 seams rather than 1. But if you put 1 right in the middle, then your eye just goes right to it. So that's why you want to balance it out and put the seams on the outer edges. So anyway, we have the linings all cut and sewn together, and then we would press those seams. And like I said, after they're serged, then you just have 1 seam allowance. And then so you'd press that to the one side or the other, left to the left and the right to the right. And then we can set the linings aside while we're preparing the face fabric. The first thing we have to do with the face fabric is put the side hems in and the bottom hem. The top is going to stay raw until we mount it to the board. So we're just going to leave the top raw and then get in the width of the shade by turning over the side hems. And at this point, we want to make sure that the seams are the same distance from the side hems on either side. So we're making sure that we are getting this shade tabled to the width, the finished width, and that there's the same amount of fabric on either side of the shade from the seam to the edge. So once the side hems are in and pressed, then I laid down this khaki color lining and pressed the serged seam allowances, towards the outside, and then get those seams laying straight and trying to balance them. They don't have to exactly lay over the seams of the face fabric, but they have to be really close and then also balanced from side to side. So I spend a lot of time making sure everything is straight and balanced, and then pressing all the wrinkles out. And also the khaki color lining, those seams are facing up. So the wrong side is laying up because that way the right side is closest to the face of the fabric. So that just kind of hides the seams a little bit more because they're inside. So you could lay it either way, but the best way is to put the seams face down on top of the wrong side of the face fabric. And then of course the white lining, those seams have to be right side up at this point because that's going to be the back of the shade. So same thing with that. I had already pressed the seams of the white lining, so that was ready. But then, you have to lay it on top of the shade and then get the seams balanced. And then at that point, I can tuck everything into the side hems and then turn the side hem, repress it, make sure everything's nice and flat, pin it, and also cut away the extra. So same with the lining and khaki color lining. Have more than you need, so that way you can cut away as you're tabling, and that way you don't come up too short. And then press the other side, and you can see how nice and flat everything is. I use my wooden yardstick, as I call it, a sweeper, to sweep out all the bubbles and everything. So once everything is super flat and balanced and everything, you have your side hems in, then I prefer to hand stitch those side hems. If this was a drapery, I would be taking that over to the blind hemmer and use the machine to do the side hems. But in a Roman shade, I want to just keep everything laying as flat as possible. So, and it's not that long, so Hannah and I just tag team, one of us on either side, and we hand stitched the side hems. And it's a really nice professional finish to have a hand stitching. Some people glue the side hems on a Roman shade, which is also okay, but I really don't like using glue. It's messy, and I would rather have the peace of mind that those seams are stitched down. So that's my preference, is to hand stitch. And like I said, it really doesn't take that long. And I like to use the color thread that matches the face fabric. And then we finally get to turn up that bottom hem after that. So I'm using the lines on my table to turn up the bottom hem. And I tested my line to make sure that it's still installed on my table properly. Over time, those lines kind of shift and move. So I always like to remind people that you want to test your lines on your table and make sure, especially when you're making something that has to be square, put your ruler on there and test it and make sure it's square before you trust it. So I did that, and my line is good. So I folded up my bottom hem on that 20-inch dark black line and then cut away some of the extra lining that's not necessary. I still have some of it turned into the bottom hem, but not all of it. And then I always trim away some at the corners so that the corners of the bottom hem are not super bulky, because that's where the side hem and the bottom hem are intersecting. So open that up and trim away as much as you want until you're happy with how it feels. And of course, be careful not to trim away too much so that it might be thinner than the rest of it. So you just trim away a little at a time until you're happy with that. And then of course we're going to hand stitch this. If we hand stitch the sides, we're going to hand stitch the bottom. And this part I would not glue. I would definitely hand stitch your bottom hem because it's going to get a weight put into it, and I would be afraid that the weight would maybe put stress on the glue over time. So go ahead and hand stitch that bottom hem, and then after that we can start planning our knife pleats. This is a knife pleat Roman shade after all, so we have to plan where those are going to go and then get them pressed in and then to the sewing machine. So now I'm ready to mark the spacing of the knife pleats. And side note, the bottom hem is 3 inches, and it's a 3-inch double hem. So my first knife pleat is going to be marked at 6 3/4 up from the bottom of the shade. So the 3-inch hem will not be in the way of my first pocket. So I'm marking from the bottom up to the first pocket at 6 3/4. And then I want to have my spaces to end up at 8 inches. So because we're gonna do the knife pleats, I'm gonna add 1.5 inches to my spacing so that I can have enough to sew in a 3/4 inch pocket. So from the first mark at 6 3/4, I'm going to mark all the rest of them at 9.5. And so every pin is going to be set at 9.5. And then I can turn the shade over and start using those marks to measure out and press in the pocket. And I'm going to remeasure every pleat just to make sure that the fabric doesn't add too much and that I end up with a straight line. So my pins are really to kind of like guide me in where each pocket's going to be, but I'm going to measure each one as I go. So the pins might end up being moved because as you fold over your fabric and measure to the next one, those marks might end up a little bit different. So you can see I'm using a ruler to make sure the fabric that is folded towards the face gets pushed down all the way into each pocket. I don't want to have any extra fabric anywhere, so you want to make sure that gets pushed all the way in. After the first one is folded in and pressed, I'll pin it, and then I'll fold that one up and then measure to the next pin, which is 9.5. So then I'll measure from the first fold that's pressed in to the next one in several places all the way across the shade at 9.5. And then once I'm happy that I have a nice straight parallel fold from the previous one, I'll press that and pin it into place, and then continue that process until I have all of the pockets pressed and pinned. And this shade, the finished length is 57.5. So with that bottom fold starting at 6 3/4, that means I need 6 pockets, and then I'll have all the extra at the top, which will be cut down once I'm ready to mount. So I ended up using about 75.5 inches of fabric total, and then that included enough for my bottom hem and the pockets, and then extra at the top for mounting. So once I have 6 pockets measured and pressed and pinned, then we can take it to the sewing machine, the walking foot sewing machine, and then sew in 3/4 inch pockets. I'm getting ready to sew the pockets on this knife pleat Roman shade, and the pockets are all pressed and pinned into place right where the spacing is going to get the Roman shade to be the right length. So I carefully measured and pressed and pinned all of these pleats, and so now I have to carefully sew them 3/4 of an inch for each pocket, and I'm gonna try to not poke myself too much. So I'm gonna start with the first pocket at the top and just get this kind of opened up. This is the top of the shade, so it's just all the raw fabric. So turn that out of the way. And this machine doesn't have a guide, but I have tape and a pencil line marked on my machine here to show me where 3/4 of an inch is. I'm gonna try to be as consistent as possible and stay on the line. And the walking foot machine is the best machine to do this on because there's a lot of layers here, and a Roman shade has to be really accurate and it has to stay square. So on a regular sewing machine, it would be pushing, the foot on the regular machine would be pushing the top layer, and it would kind of push your Roman shade out of square. So that's why I like to use this machine to sew the pockets. Oops. I'm getting ready to sew on rings onto this knife pleat Roman shade. So this is a knife pleat right here. So I can put stabilizing ribs inside the pockets, and then also there's enough room after the rib goes in that I have room for the ring to be stitched right there. And then now that I have these rings all stitched on, I can stuff the pockets with the stabilizing ribs and hand stitch the ends of the pockets closed, and then it's ready to mount it to the board and connect the continuous clutch. So we're mounting this on the back of a board, and because of that, we need to get the strings from the back of the shade to the front. And the only way to do that is to put little grommets in the top of the shade to fish the string through those grommets and up to the clutch. I'm just getting all the grommets put in at this point, and then after that, then I will mount the shade to the board. After the grommets are in and the shade is mounted, you get the clutch all set, and I have another video that shows you where to put the brackets and where to put the screw eyes and which kind of screws I use and all that. So go back to that previous video to see that, and then once the clutch is installed onto the board, then you can string the string from the back. So here is how the knife pleat Roman shade is looking. And so it's mounted on the board, and it's a back mount. Even though it's inside mount, the designer wanted it back mounted with a self valance. So I have the valance made over there, but I'm not going to attach it until I string it up on the clutch. And I just want to point out that I have 5 screw eyes, one there in line with my rings, and also the grommets are here because the cord is going to come out from the back behind the shade through the grommets and then into the clutch. So this string will go through this screw eye and then under this one, and then clip to the shaft, and then this one will come right up through the front of this bracket. Same with this one and this one and this one. And then this opposite end will come through this screw eye, through that, this is a grommet. It'll come through this grommet, through this screw eye, and then through these screw eyes, and then up to the shaft. And normally I would just have one here, but I'm gonna just leave those 2 there. So now I will start stringing the strings through the back. So I'm stringing the string and attaching the safety locks at the same time, and getting the string from the bottom all the way to the top, and then through the grommets, and then up to the clutch. Okay, so we have the Roman shade hanging, and this is the back view, so you can see how that looks. And I'm gonna go raise the shade using the chain, which is on the right side from the back, but on the left side from the front. It looks pretty cool, so I'm gonna turn it around and show you how it looks from the front. All right, that looks really nice. It's just leaning because that mounting tripod is leaning, so it looks like it's not level, or I don't know if you can tell in the video, but it is. It's looking really good, and it didn't hardly need any dressing. And then all I have to do now is add the valance to the front, and it's all done. Okay, here is my little 6-inch valance that I'm going to attach to the front of the Roman shade. I have some buckram in there to stiffen it so it lays really nice. And I have it pinned where I want to attach it to the board. And since this is an inside mount, it's not going to cover the sides at all. It's just going to fit on the face from end to end. I made sure that my pattern matched from here to here. And once this is all, hanging flush to the inside of the window, this bottom will match the Roman shade underneath. But right now at this angle, it's not exactly on there, but it's kind of one of those patterns that it kind of does look like it matches like that. So once I pin it in place, I'll staple it at the top, and then I'll bring around this loose bit of lining that's covering the board and tuck under the raw edge and staple it closed. So I'm just cutting off the extra bit of this valance, and then I'll cover it up. This is more lining than I need also, so I'm going to cut some of this down. Makes it easier and less bulky. Then I'm going to tuck in all the raw edges and pin it into place, covering up the staples from the valance, and then I can just put a couple of staples up here. Even though those will be visible, it'll be impossible to see this because it'll be up against the inside of the ceiling of the window since it's an inside mount. But we still want to, you know, finish it nice and neat without any raw edges, but those couple of staples that'll be seen right here will not be seen actually, so it's okay. Even if this was outside mount, I would close it up with staples right there. Okay, just wanted to show you both of these Roman shades are finished, and they don't look much different when they're finished because even though this is a knife pleat and this is a flat Roman, anytime you raise a Roman shade all the way up, even if it's a hobbled Roman, they pretty much look the same in the up position. But you can see, I'll flip this over from the back. This one has pockets, and then I'll flip this one over, no pockets. It's just flat on the back and flat on the front. And then this one is outside mount, back mount, so we have the shade coming off the back, and then the valance has returns because if it's going to be outside mount, you're going to see the side, so we want to cover up both sides of the returns with the valance. And this one is an inside mount, so we don't want to put anything on the returns because then it might not fit the window. We leave a little bit of space, so we deduct a 1/2 inch from the board, from the window measurement, and then we know that the board is going to fit. I left this guy a little bit hanging over just to conceal any gap that there might be, but we don't need returns because it's an inside mount. It'll go inside the frame of the window, and so that's why this has a valance over it because it's a back mount. It doesn't need to be back mounted for an inside mount, but the designer likes this look with the valance, and so that's what we did. And the only thing I have to do is connect the safety tension device, and then I can wrap them up. That's the difference between the flat Roman shade and the knife pleat Roman shade.